Directed by Luca Guadagnino, Queer follows Lee, a man recounting his life in Mexico City among expat American students. He pursues a young man named Eugene, a U.S. Navy serviceman recently discharged from Jacksonville, Florida. Queer stars Daniel Craig, Drew Starkey, Jason Schwartzman, and many more. So, Jeffrey, what did you think about Queer?
I think Queer is going to be a bit of a tough one. There was like a collective feeling among us, I think, when we walked out of the theater of like, how are we going to review this? Some of my favorite reviews of ours are when we take abstract films and we try to make some sort of meaning out of them, one with various interpretations. We can explore those interpretations together and hopefully hear from some of our viewers about their ideas and their interpretations of the film. This film was one of the first in a while that I was pretty stumped when it ended, and I'm not sure if it's a product of the film not totally working or if I simply need to sit with it longer, but it's certainly a film that keeps you at arm's length. It doesn't really invite you in very often. It's definitely an experiment in how little of an explanation or even type of thematic imagery or coherence you can give an audience and still expect the film to resonate with them. One way or another, though, I think you really do have to respect the audacity here because it is so unabashedly abstract. It's so unnerving and sad in its imagery that I think it's just unapologetic in so many ways. I think there's a very good case for it to be made that it's not working, and perhaps you'll make that case to me today, but I will say that I found the film very captivating. There's a certain aura of intrigue and mystery and abstraction that I just found really, really thrilling as a viewer. This haunting and dreadful loneliness that seems to permeate every frame of the film. And so much of it doesn't make cognitive sense to me, but it does engage me on a moment-to-moment tonal basis. So very in and of itself, as little as I'm able to explain its intentions, it does make sense to me intuitively as it moves. It's a film that I really feel deeply as it continues to move from scene to scene, even if I can't explain totally why it's working for me. In a sense, I wish I had seen this film again before we reviewed it, but at the same time, I also feel like I've relived this film a couple of times for how much I've been thinking about it since we left the theater. It's definitely interesting, but it haunted me quite a bit, and I found that it really has stuck with me.
Okay, I'll be interested to ask you the question of why it haunted you in a little bit. Before we get there, as you had said originally, yes, we left Queer with this interesting feeling. I felt like it was one of the more confounding movies that I had seen all year. Upon reflection, my opinions have changed a little bit, and I think they differ in some ways from where you're going, but I did find it less confounding, but maybe perhaps a little bit more elusive. I do think, unfortunately, that's because I think it missed the mark a little bit. I think all in all, I'm having a very difficult time connecting with this film, and you had interpreted differently, so that's why I'm interested to hear what you have to say. And it's odd because I find it to be a film whose parts are very well thought out and executed. There are these moments of absolute visual splendor that harken back to this old Hollywood feeling with its set design. It seems like it's on sound stages that mimic Mexico City, and this color palette, which is so rich. And I would say it's almost entrancing the way it looks. It's really pulling you in with its visual
hypnotic.
imagery. Yeah, it's hypnotic. That's a very good way of putting it. The acting, of course, is completely top-notch. I know a lot of people have said this, but it features one of the best, if not the best performance of Daniel Craig's career. If I had to judge it on its individual elements, I would say they're mostly superb, if not masterful. But I think the sum of its parts ended up making a film that in the end feels quite hollow to me. And so I want to discuss why that is, but I do want to back up to maybe how the film is crafted and take it piece by piece maybe, because this film is broken up to 3 parts and an epilogue, and that's the way the movie is framed. The first part, we meet Daniel Craig's character Lee, and he is a pretty sad and downtrodden man. He sits at the bar. He orders his next drink before he even downs his first drink.
This is sick.
Yes, which goes against the movie trope of people, going to the bar, downing their drink and be like, give me another one. You get a sense from this man that he is even more than a drunk than those people in those films. And he's oogling young men, and he takes them to these hotels where he makes love to them. During his days doing this repetitive behavior every day, he comes across the man Eugene, played by Drew Starkey, who is very elusive in his own ways. He's very mysterious, but he flashes Lee with a look. And it's not just one of these friendly, hi, nice to meet you looks. It's the look. It is one of desire and interest. And it's in this moment that Lee sees Eugene as his next lover to get into that hotel, I guess. This first part of the movie is probably my favorite part of the film entirely. It is filled with so much of what I would call these lifestyle scenes. There's time in the bar where we get to know all these characters and how they navigate the space. So we're getting a really good sense of their personalities. There's these scenes at Lee's house between him and Eugene where we see all these little details, such as this pack with the spoon and the needle. So we find out that he's using drugs before we even see him partake in the drug usage. So I really enjoy these details that are built into this first act. There's just so much world building here that I really appreciate.
The film, I think, is best written in those passages too, because the dialogue sort of crackles when you hear these people speak to one another. I agree with you that I think Craig is mesmerizing in this movie. Like, his character Lee is so desperate. Like, dare I say, he's kind of pathetic. When he first sees Drew Starkey's character, he like stands up and does this little dance.
Yeah. It's so cringe.
Yeah, it's so cringe. He does these other little suave affects that are really embarrassing to watch. There's this one part where he talks about how they should kill a pig and eat it. He's just trying to make a joke and be funny on a date, and he just wails for like way too long. Anyway, it's really odd and funny and difficult to watch. But one can argue, and I'm sure maybe you will, that the characterization isn't particularly deep. I think Lee is a stand-in for this sad desperation that eventually morphs itself into an appetite for self-destruction. As somebody becomes more desperate, I think self-destruction seems more appealing, almost like there's a disregard for oneself because it doesn't matter anyway type of vibe. That's something that I understand. Like, I think that there's a particular type of sadness, a type of loneliness where you're drifting from substance to substance, person to person, that doesn't need much of an explanation in my mind, or like whatever the film lacks with its sharpness of characterization, I think it makes up for with its tone. Results really may vary depending on what kind of film watcher you are, because again, I can't really defend the characterizations here and say that they're deeper and you're just missing it. I think you're right on the money. I did love the way the film showed his desire with the faded arm and hand.
Yeah.
Like, it imagines his fading hand brushing against Eugene's back or like his hair and things like that. And you can
things he desires.
Yeah, you could feel as an audience member how deep that desire is. And I thought that was a really intuitive and effective way to show that through like the medium of image.
Going from there to Drew Starkey's role as Eugene, his character is so mystifying, and this doesn't really evolve as the film progresses. If not, it becomes more mystifying because there are these times in which he completely rejects Lee. His interest wanes from scene to scene, and it's almost like bipolar. It's either he's completely into it, interested, or feigning interest maybe, or he's completely disinterested, which makes me feel weird about him feigning interest because he's obviously acting with disinterest in so many scenes. Like, there's no reason to feign it. I don't think he's feigning it. I don't really know what's up with his character. And this is one of the big problems I have with the movie, is that I feel like there's not enough there. It's just so murky, and I don't think it's in a good way. If a film's going to be murky about it, at least be murky about it and lead me to think something interesting about his character. But for me, I have nothing to think about it.
You're talking about this pivotal line between being unclear and being ambiguous.
Yes.
This is clearly an intentional choice because he's so emotionally bankrupt. Like, he's so blank in his face. Like, he's playing this completely unreadable cipher. And as his inscrutability is integral to the plot, and I think integral to why Lee is so interested in him in the first place, you can argue that that's more in service of Lee's character than it is like a deep characterization of any sort. Through other things we have watched, I know that it really irks you when this happens.
You had mentioned music in the film, and I do want to discuss that because it was one of the inconsistencies and the things I did not like about the film. I thought the music choices were entirely mystifying to me. I remember thinking at one point that, this track feels like it's straight out of the Challenger soundtrack. I thought so many of these songs just varied in tone. Visually speaking, the film had this wonderful aesthetic, and I wish they had just chosen music that complemented the time period and felt more consistent in tone.
I agree with you somewhat. I think the Nirvana song didn't work at all, but they used a Prince song that I thought was fantastic, and they used, is it a Joy Division song? Don't yell at me, whoever. It's kind of like an 80s new wave track. It's the track that's used when Daniel Craig shoots up, and it's kind of like a 3-minute shot of just him kind of getting high.
Yeah.
I thought that all of that works, but I thought the Nirvana needle drop in the beginning was really weird, especially because that's a song that's so popular and well known. If you're using modern music that I think is a little less iconic than Nirvana, kind of like the other music they used, I think that works. but the Nirvana song was weird.
So I want to get to the second part of this film, but I think going from here, we're going to get into a deeper analysis, so I would consider this spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen Queer, which it seems like a lot of people already have, but if you haven't, feel free to come back to this review.
Yeah, we're last on this boat.
Yeah, we are last in this review. But if you want to watch the rest of the review after you've seen Queer, now would be the time to check out and come back. So as we enter the second part of the film, I would say there's these surrealist elements that come to play that really separate itself from the first part, and it's something that actually grows even into the third part, which gets quite wild. I started noticing during this section of the movie that there become these inconsistencies in the film. It's moving from scene to scene. I feel like there's a disconnect between where the characters are in one scene to the next scene. One good example of this is Lee becoming sick. And all of a sudden, I'm just kind of like, where did we get here? How did we get here so quickly? This is where my interest starts to wane.
I won't say that I found the second half to be more interesting than the first, but I was definitely interested in the swing that they were doing. So much of that, I think the heavy lifting has to do with the tone. It's like this undergoing or undercurrent of tension that the film has that I think it does maintain. But as we're getting into the more hallucinatory aspects of the film, I think we get some imagery that's easy to parse through and things that aren't easy to parse through. So, for instance, I know that there's an image towards the end of a snake eating its own tail. Common metaphor for like repetitive self-destruction. The snake is also crying as it's eating itself, which is interesting. And I don't know what to make of this. I'm just remarking upon it. A reenactment of something that happened in William S. Burroughs' actual life, where he was going to shoot a glass off of his wife's head and ends up shooting his wife and killing her, which is something that he does to Drew Starkey's character in a dream sequence or surreal. It doesn't happen in real life.
Yeah, under this drug. I think under this drug.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. I would like to parse through that and maybe sit with that a little bit more and certainly see the film again at some point and think about it. But I was intrigued by all of these sequences. I agree with you that I'm not totally sure they all fit together. I'm not sure that it's a perfectly written film and it's a film that makes a lot of thematic coherence, but I was interested enough in all of these tidbits as just things to think on the way home that it was enough for me that I enjoyed all of that.
So when they get to this scientist who has this plant and puts them, she makes it for them, prepares it, and then they go on this big trip.
Unrecognizable Lesley Manville.
Oh my gosh. I had no idea it was her. And she was fantastic.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, she was weird and strange. You expect so much of like a scientist when you see them. Yeah. Or somebody in the sciences. And she was just so bizarre and out there. And I think maybe taken by this drug too much. I don't know. It seems like she maybe does it every now and then.
Very, very unlike Mary from Another Year. Towards the end, we do get a little bit of a sense of Eugene is repressing something. That's not really explored. It is thrown out there. And there's a very interesting tidbit that seems to something what he recognizes within himself when it's said. I think it's something along the lines of, a door is now open. You can either walk through the door or look the other way.
Yes.
And that seems to resonate with him, but we don't totally know why.
That's the deepest we get into his character, I would say, that moment.
Yeah.
Which was a good moment. I just wish there was maybe more of that.
But that leads to what I think is one of the more powerful metaphors in the film, or one of the more powerful images in the film, which is the final one. I thought the end, which is basically Lee as an old man laying in bed, thinking about Eugene. He's fully clothed, old man, and he has this image, this like feeling that Eugene is there, snuggling him in bed, cuddling him. Whether this is a dream or whether this is reality, it's sad either way. He could be a young man thinking of himself as an old man, still thinking about Eugene. Yeah. Either way, it's sad.
But it's also in the hotel where he hooked up with all these men.
Yes. I thought that was really, really effective. When we were talking about earlier what haunted you about this film, I think I found that very haunting. In particular, this idea of unrequited love, or I think it was Breakfast All Day, just to quote them so I'm not stealing their ideas. They said it was more like love out of sync rather than unrequited love. So just this idea that love out of sync can be so out of sync, but at the same time so desperate and so unfulfilling that it follows you for the rest of your life, I think is a really terrifying idea. And I think that's a thing that can happen. And I think the film very effectively communicated that. So
I would agree with the sentiment. I don't agree with the communication of that sentiment. There is actually this very surreal moment where he walks into a room. He sees himself from the outside as like a big person looking through the windows of the hotel.
Oh yeah, he's like looking through it almost like it's a dollhouse.
Yeah. Like he's looking at himself. And
that's cool, actually. I forgot about that.
I found that to be one of the most spectacular moments of the entire movie. I wanted to feel for him, and I understand why I should feel for him, but I didn't feel for him. His character doesn't get deep enough for me to actually care. And so I care with the idea of, wow, it must be really sad to live your entire life going from man to man, not really settling down with anybody because you never just fit with somebody. and then being alone. I mean, that's tragic. I realize everybody's not the same way. Some people are fine being single all their lives, and that's completely respectable. But for his particular character, he desires someone to be with.
Yeah.
So I get it. I didn't feel it.
It's interesting.
Say that.
No, I think what's interesting is both of our explanations about the film, I think, are a little scattershot. I feel like I can't totally grasp why I liked it, and you maybe can't totally grasp why you didn't like it. And I've seen this, I think, in all the reviews that I've watched, that it's simply a hard film to talk about. And I think it's a hard film to reckon with on some level. And maybe that's why I'm attracted to it. That's why I'm being maybe a little over generous to it. Like I said in the beginning, I think there's a very good cognitive and logical explanation for this film not working.
Personally, I think it's that the characters aren't deep enough. They're almost like a caricature of a person, and they represent something. And we've talked about this before. Their characters representing an idea rather than a persona.
Yeah, completely.
I rather see the persona because that's what makes me care about the overall meaning and message of the film.
Those things do matter to me sometimes. It really depends what else is going on in the film. I would agree with you that I think both characters are underdeveloped.
Another thing that interests me is the knowledge that this film was originally, 4 hours, 3.5 hours?
Yeah, which I would watch that cut.
That is a very large portion of film to cut. I'm wondering if that actually contributes to some of these inconsistencies I'm seeing, or these jumps and these lackings in characterizations. I wonder if maybe there was more. At the same time, if there's more there and it actually is all the same, that would probably make me like the film less.
You know how they're doing, Variety's doing their actors on actors thing that they always put out this time of year? There's one between Josh O'Connor and Daniel Craig, because obviously they both worked with Luca Guadagnino this year. Josh O'Connor had mentioned that during the Challengers press tour, he had seen Queer. Luca had shown it to him because they were spending so much time together. And Daniel Craig was like, it's a lot different now. And Josh said, yeah, I haven't seen the new cut of it.
Oh.
So he had seen the original 3.5 hour cut and not the new cut, which is pretty interesting.
I find interesting that Daniel Craig literally said it's very different now.
This is kind of conjecture, but I think that this film was having trouble finding a distributor. And I think cutting it down to 2 hours and 15 minutes made it a lot more attractive. Even at 2 hours and 15 minutes, it's a film that's tough to swallow. It's on the short list of oddest and most challenging films to receive a wide release in the past couple of years, I would say. That 3.5 hour cut would be quite a undertaking, I think, for an audience member. So you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I give the film a B-. I appreciate a lot that's happening in this film.
That's a fair grade, actually. I was thinking you were going to be in C territory.
Okay. I think what it is I appreciate visually a lot that's happening in this movie. The set design, the acting, so much is really well thought out. And
linen suits.
The linen suits and the hats.
Yeah, great hats.
Those 50s, 60s hats.
Drew Starkey's glasses. Sorry. Just keep going.
No, they were great. Also, I'm going to put this in here briefly because we didn't talk about this, was Jason Schwartzman's character. I really enjoyed his character. I wish there was more of him in this film. I don't know what else to add. I really love the visuals. I really love the acting. I love the idea of the overall message, but I just don't like the execution or the emotions it gave me. I just don't feel emotionally connected to it.
I give it a B+ because I embrace the mess. I love the mess. No. And I'm being very upfront about my flaws as a film reviewer right now, that I am more forgiving of things that take chances. And I'm more forgiving of these movies that are vibey if I'm into the vibe.
Yeah.
Like Pacifiction. I showed you La Chimera recently, which is one of my favorite movies of the year, which you liked, but definitely not as much as me. So this particular type of film is something that I'm pretty forgiving towards. And what's interesting is I was not forgiving towards these films earlier in my life. I found them really hollow and thin, and somewhere in the past couple of years, I turned a corner on films like this. I'm not totally sure why, but a couple of things I want to say just that we didn't get to in the review, that Luca Guadagnino, I think, making a film like Challengers and then making a film like this in 1 year. I know that Challengers was delayed, so it was supposed to come out last year, but either way, making these films that are so utterly different from one another in such close succession, I thought was really cool. They have some things that tie them together. Obviously, he's a big fan of sexual tension, but he doesn't have just one style that he's replicating and perfecting over and over. I haven't read Queer, but I have read other William S. Burroughs novels, and I've read some of his short writing, and this certainly feels like you're reading a William S. Burroughs novel, and that's almost more important to me in a work of adaptation than getting all of the characters right or getting the events right. It feels like you're reading the book. This is what I pictured when I was reading William S. Burroughs. So I think that that's really fantastic. Again, I just thought that this film was really captivating. A lot of the chances it took, I was just on board for them, and I think it just comes down to that. I'm really anxious to see this again. I don't know if this will be in the top 10 or the honorable mentions. I think a second watch of this could really be make or break. I was full of it the first time, and there's actually nothing here, or maybe there's quite a bit here, or the vibe worked for me so well again that it's actually a great film. I don't know, but I'm really interested to see it again.
All right, and that's it for our review of Queer. Queer is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's worth a watch. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this film? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.